Okay, picture this. It's 2003. You just finished a session of GTA Vice City on the PlayStation 2. Your friend calls you to go see The Matrix Reloaded. You saw the first one, it was amazing, so how could the second one be bad? You grab your Game Boy Advance SP to head out the door just in case you get bored. Then you think to yourself, I might want to get some pictures on this epic night out. You go to grab a camera, and you have two choices. Which one do you pick? Let's take a look at the contenders. First up is the reigning champion. It's a film point and shoot, the Canon Sure Shot 80U. It's your fairly typical 35mm point and shoot camera. It's got a zoom lens from 38mm all the way out to 80mm. Okay zoom. It's got a maximum aperture of 4.7 at the wide end, though that does narrow down to about f9 at the telephoto end. So nothing incredible, but remember, it's 35mm film, so therefore it's full frame. It's all pretty much automatic, hence the name point and shoot, but it does have some nice features like exposure compensation, macro mode, self-timer, so a little bit more than your bare basic point and shoot camera. But now for the scrappy upstart. Also from 2003 is the HP Photosmart 935. It's largely the same as the Canon point and shoot, however, this one is digital. Now, HP might not be a name that comes to mind when you think about photography. However, they were a pretty big name in the early days of digital photography, and they didn't go about it alone. The lens on here is actually a Pentax zoom lens, which is a long-time lens and camera maker. The lens actually has a wider aperture than the Canon, starting off at f2.6 at the wide end, and then narrowing down to f4.8 at the telephoto end. The lens itself zooms from 7.6mm out to 22.8mm, which sounds very wide. However, it's a 1/1/8 inch sensor, which means the equivalent of about a 38mm to, I think it's 111mm. So the field of view on both of the cameras are pretty much the same, though there will be some differences having full frame versus a kind of a today's smartphone size sensor. All in all, these are incredibly similar cameras that are going after a very similar customer base. So how is 2003 me supposed to decide between the two? Let's break it down. So of course price is going to be a factor, but it's not as easy of an assessment as you might think. So I wasn't able to find the exact starting price of the Canon Sure Shot 80U, but the 120U and the 90U were above it, and those started at about $180 and $150 respectively. So I would guess maybe about $120, $130. Whereas the HP started at $399, so about $400, considerably larger of an investment than the Canon. Now, of course, just buying the camera only gets you so much. We got to take into account a few other things. So on the HP, of course, you're going to need a memory card. And back during that time, you can expect to spend somewhere between $50 and $150, depending on the size of the card you wanted. Now, of course, with the Canon, you're going to have to feed this thing with film. But if you've been shooting film recently, please don't cry, because back in this day, a 4-pack of Fujifilm 200 went for about $8. And then it was about $3 or $4 to process that film. So on cost, like I said, it's not as clear cut as it might seem. It's going to be kind of up to you and your shooting style, plus the user experience and the end results that's going to help make that decision for you. So now, as far as the user experience goes, I can kind of go through it here right now if you'd like, but I think more valuable would be just go out and take some pictures. So let's go do that. So to try this out, we're in downtown Pasadena. We're going to take a few shots, and I really want to just try to get good pictures. It's real tempting to take this old digital camera and just make it look terrible, because really it doesn't stand up to what we have today. But we're looking at it from the perspective of 2003. So we're going to go through some of the use of these cameras, see how easy it is to use, and see what kind of results we get out of it. So first, let's get set up. One of the nice things about the HP is that it takes AA batteries. So I don't have to source some sort of old battery and find something that still works. I can just grab some brand new AA's. It takes a full-size SD card. I have a 1GB card, which would have been really expensive at the time. Really what we are looking at mostly is like 64 megabyte or 128 megabyte cards. So the number of photos I get on the HP with the 1GB card is about 350 photos or so. But it would be really hard to come by a 1GB card at the time. So really we're looking at maybe 5 or 6 rolls worth of film on one memory card. That would be reasonable. Then on the Canon, we're going to be shooting with Fujifilm 200, which is a consumer level type of film that you would normally see out on vacation or just grabbing some snapshots with the family. The battery in the Canon is a pretty standard camera battery. It lasts for a really long time. I think I put this one in about a year ago and it's still going. And we'll just pop in some film and off we go. The wide angle of both of these is about the same, so actually I can get pretty similar framing with both of these cameras. One interesting thing that I'm finding is that in the viewfinder, you'll actually get a zoom, but you cannot see what's in focus. Now with the HP, that might not really matter since it's a small sensor, so we should have a pretty deep depth of field. But on the Canon, since it's a essentially full frame sensor, we might have some issues getting things in focus. We might have some back focus or something along those lines. All right, we'll try another part of town, see if we can get some shots and kind of go back and forth, and we'll look at the results later.
So don't worry about the quick flashes of photos here and there. We'll take a closer look in a little bit and go into some of the details.
So one interesting thing I found going back to film photography is that while 36 exposure sounds like not nearly enough, because you can go through a couple hundred on a digital camera, what I find more often than not is I have a roll on my camera, I'm trying to figure out how to use the last couple of frames. All right, and this looks like a good opportunity to try out the macro modes of these cameras. So I'll start off with the Canon. It just has a button to change mode. I'll go over to macro. It'll actually zoom in automatically because that's going to be your closest focus. And let me frame up this flower here. Now one thing is I can't see the focus in the viewfinder, so I'm not sure if it's automatically grabbing that focus or not. And that's kind of important because with this being full frame, I might actually get some decent bokeh, even though it's got a narrow aperture. I'm so close, I should be able to get some of that background blur. The background blur is going to be harder to get with this digital camera because the sensor is so much smaller. I'm going to go ahead and change this over to macro mode. So button on top, very dim. It's hard for me to see that it's lit up, but it is in macro mode. I'll do the same thing. I'll zoom in, I'll frame up the flower, and hopefully I'm getting a good macro shot of this flower. Now, of course, on here I can see in this very washed out and tiny screen that at least the flower looks like it's in focus. So 1 point for digital, but we'll have to look at the results and see what we get out of that later. So I'm at 13 frames on here, and this tells me I have 357 frames left on here. So again, there's a different philosophy in shooting film, what you're choosing to grab. And so I'm actually translating that over to my digital camera here. I'm not just spraying and praying, I'm actually being very cognizant about what I'm shooting. So of course there's nothing to stop you from being contemplative and thoughtful about every shot you take on a digital camera. But it's tempting to just shoot everything and not even really think about it just because you have so many frames you can work with. It's kind of a psychological trick you're playing on yourself when you're shooting film, being very cognizant about what you're shooting. So let's see what else we can get. So I think I've shot everything I want to shoot around here, and on the digital camera that's not a big deal. If I could be done for the day, I can go home, I can pull the stuff off the memory card, do what I want with it, share it. But on film, I've shot 15 shots, which means I still have quite a ways to go to finish off this 36 shot roll. So why don't we find somewhere else where we can finish off this roll. All right, so we're going to try a couple more shots here in Old Town, Pasadena. Get the train station. It's a classic shot. What I noticed is it takes a lot longer for the HP to start up. When I turn on the Canon, it's just about ready to go. I gotta wait for this thing to boot up, and then I can take a picture. So there is a little bit of convenience factor in being able to just turn it on and be ready to go. Let's go here. Here's one with some danger about getting some back focus rather than the subject, but probably look good. Probably look good either way. All right, switching back and forth between these two. And then looks like a good time to grab a beer right by the Stone Tap Room, so let's go check it out. All right, so I think that's it for now, and we'll get some low light stuff later. Cheers. All right, so we're gonna get the classic analog trope of the basketball hoop, and this one illuminated at night. So we're gonna throw these on the tripod to get a nice steady shot, so we can not use the flash and see what we get out of it.
Little did I know that the HP would just completely give out on me at this point. So I've got a bunch of wasted footage here, but I'll show you the results of the film at least at the end.
Lost it. All right, I think this thing is dead. Well, we'll work with what we got. All right, so it's the next morning. We're gonna do a little bit of processing. This video is not about processing. If you want to see a video about that, then let me know. But what it is talking a little bit about what is film in 2003. So when we talk about convenience in 2003 for film, most people would just take it to a lab. They would go shopping, they would drop off the film to a 1 hour photo, and then by the time they're done shopping, they pick up their prints, maybe a photo CD if they wanted a digital copy, and that would be it. Is that less convenient than digital? If you needed prints, not really. It's probably about the same. If you just wanted those digital copies, then sure, digital photos, you'll have it right off the bat. But people were used to it. It was just the norm. Just like today, if you were to talk about, hey, why do you have to stop every 200 or 300 miles to put gas in your car instead of plugging it in at night and just be ready to go in the morning? People are just used to it. There's no context that people had to be used to the easier version. I will say from a modern perspective, there's something I kind of like about the process of kind of stopping everything else and focusing directly on the film. I can't really focus on anything else because this demands my entire focus. This demands my attention, and I have to pay attention to the timer and pay attention to temperatures, volumes. Stop. Next up after this, we'll take a closer look at the big picture, but also zoom in and try to look at some of the fine details.
So here's our first look at the photos side by side. On the left, I'm going to put the film photos, and on the right, the digital. And we'll also zoom in so we can kind of see the fine details. On the face of it, you can see that they look pretty similar, a little bit brighter on the film side, but that's mostly because I have more room to work with in editing. The film photos are scanned using my Fujifilm X-T4, and I edit it in Lightroom using Negative Lab Pro. So I have a little bit more latitude to work with since film does have quite a bit of detail in there. Now, if you're watching this in 4K, this is actually 100% size of the image from the HP. It does have a lower resolution, but if you look in, that Pentax lens is doing a good job making the most of the resolution it has. A couple of things to note is that the HP does not shoot RAW, so I don't have a lot of room to work with the photos. You'll also see that generally these film shots are going to be a little bit warmer. It's on Fuji 200, which is currently Kodak Gold, and it's a fairly warm film. Of course, part of that can come down to how I like to edit my photos and my own personal aesthetics. So widely as snapshots, it kind of comes down to personal preference. But if you pop in a little bit, you can see that that Pentax lens on the HP is doing a great job pulling in detail even at a low resolution. And you can see that little Canon lens is struggling to grab fine details on a full frame scale. But on the other hand, having that quote-unquote full-frame sensor does give you a nice-looking background blur when you get in nice and close to your subject. And that's even without having a very wide aperture. So when you're looking at this through the lens of, hey, this is a consumer camera from 2003, I'm going to go out and get some snapshots, and you come in close, you can see that the HP is actually holding up pretty well. Film can do some pretty incredible things, but we're talking about a consumer level point and shoot with some consumer level film. Now, of course, there's the argument of, hey, I like the way film looks. There's the nostalgia, there's the aesthetics, but to be fair, these early digital cameras actually have a certain look to it that kind of evokes that era as well. Now, of course, being digital, you get some additional benefits, like variable ISO, so I was able to hand hold this low light image of a beer, or maybe the couple of sips I had steadied my hand enough to be able to do that. And to round it out, here's a couple of indoor, lowish light flash photos that would be very common for this sort of point and shoot camera. Shortly after these shots, the HP just kind of died on me. I was going to do some outdoor tripod shots, but all you're going to get is the film versions. So our analog, here are some film photos of basketball hoops. Enjoy, I guess? So we'll just wrap this up with a few final thoughts.
So overall, I was actually pretty surprised. I was actually thinking about doing a little bit of a piece here about how I could see how Kodak would have gotten it wrong because of how much of a potato this thing is. But in shooting it for the day, there's some rough edges, but it's a usable camera. And I shouldn't be surprised. People spent $400 on this thing, took it on vacations, took family photos. It was a real legitimate camera. And you would think with that constant line of progression that something from 2003 would be borderline unusable. But it's really not. I'm sure there would have been some shortcomings had I been able to try to use it at night, but overall, it was a pleasant experience. Especially when you compare it to a point-and-shoot camera. Now, of course, like a film SLR, you're going to get much better quality out of the film, and then using a professional level film, you're going to get even better quality. But for, hey, I'm just going to go out with my buddies and get some pictures, I can see where the idea of a digital camera makes sense. And this is coming from somebody who loves to shoot film and is intending to shoot more film-related YouTube videos. But this does make me curious. I actually have a box full of old digital cameras. And I'm wondering if they're just as good of an experience as the HP with the Pentax lens, or do we have some real potatoes in here? I guess you're gonna have to subscribe to find out. But until next time, never stop having fun.